Dear listener, welcome once more to the Hercule Poirot Story Podcast, where the little gray cells awaken to unravel the most perplexing enigmas of human folly and malice. Tonight, we transport you to the fog-shrouded moors of Devon, England, in the year 1932, a time when the world teetered between the remnants of Edwardian grandeur and the shadows of impending modernity. Picture, if you will, the Weather Vane Inn, a venerable establishment perched atop a windswept hill, its ancient timbers creaking under the assault of relentless gales, its weather vane spinning madly, as if pointing accusatorily at the guilty. The inn, with its mullioned windows glowing faintly against the encroaching dusk, harbors secrets as deep as the peat bogs that surround it. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The Weather Vane Inn stood resolute against the desolate moors of Devon, England, its ancient silhouette carved against a sky bruised with the weight of an impending storm. It was the autumn of 1932, a time when the world lingered in the twilight of old-world gentility, yet felt the tremors of modernity encroaching like an uninvited guest. The inn itself, a relic of centuries past, was a fortress of weathered granite and gnarled oak timbers, its mullioned windows glowing faintly, as if guarding secrets against the relentless gales that swept the hills. Atop its steeply pitched roof, a wrought iron weather vane spun erratically, its arrow pointing now north, now west, as though unable to decide which direction harbored the greater peril. The moors stretched endlessly around it, a sea of peat and heather, sodden under sheets of rain that fell with biblical ferocity, while thunder growled in the distance, a harbinger of unrest. And the jingle of a bell as a heavy door creaks open. Into this tempestuous haven stepped Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective whose renown for unraveling the most labyrinthine mysteries preceded him like a fanfare. His appearance was as meticulous as his mind. A black wool overcoat tailored to perfection repelled the rain with. It is charged with more than the electricity of the storm. There is, how you say, an anticipation. The inn's foyer was a study in contrasts, warm with the glow of a roaring fire in a stone hearth, yet chilled by drafts that slithered through unseen cracks. Oak paneling, darkened by time, absorbed the light, lending the space an air of solemnity, as though the walls themselves bore witness to untold dramas. A grandfather clock ticked ponderously in the corner, its pendulum swinging like the metronome of destiny, while a threadbare Persian rug softened the flagstone floor. The scent of beeswax polish mingled with the faint musk of damp wool, and from somewhere deeper within, the clatter of crockery suggested preparations for the evening's repast. The innkeeper, Mr. Thomas Grady, emerged from a side door, his burly frame filling the threshold. A man in his mid-50s, his face was a map of hardship, etched with lines that spoke of years spent wrestling with the unforgiving Moors. His apron, stained with the ghosts of countless meals, hung loosely over a barrel chest, and his hands, calloused and broad, betrayed a life of labor. Yet his eyes, a stormy gray, flickered with a guarded warmth as he greeted his guest. "Welcome, sir, to the Weather Vane. A foul night for travel, but you'll find comfort here." His voice carried the burr of the West Country, though Poirot detected an undercurrent of restraint, as if Grady harbored thoughts he dared not voice. Psychologically, the man was an enigma, outwardly jovial, yet inwardly scarred, perhaps by some long-ago injustice that festered like a wound beneath his hospitable facade. "Merci, Monsieur Grady," Poirot replied, his Belgian accent crisp as he handed over his sodden umbrella. "You're in. It has a certain character." I trust the company shall prove equally intriguing." Grady's smile tightened imperceptibly, and he gestured toward the staircase. "Your room's ready, sir. Dinner's at 7, if it pleases you." As Poirot ascended the creaking stairs, his attention was drawn to the arrival of another guest, heralded by the groan of the front door. "Devil, but I've business to attend." Poirot, pausing on the landing, noted the imperious tone. "A man who commands," he mused, "but does he inspire loyalty or loathing?" Following closely was Mrs. Eleanor Langford, Victor's wife, a vision of ethereal beauty that seemed almost incongruous in the rugged setting. In her late 30s, her porcelain skin was untouched by the elements, her raven hair swept into an elegant chignon beneath a velvet cloche hat. Her sable fur coat, dripping with rain, whispered of opulence, yet her movements were languid, as though weighed by an invisible burden. Her blue eyes, deep as a winter lake, held a melancholy that suggested a life of unfulfilled longings. Psychologically, she was a paradox, outwardly poised, inwardly restless, her heart tethered to a marriage of convenience rather than passion. A faint perfume of jasmine trailed her, and Poirot's nostrils twitched as he catalogued it, a clue perhaps to her private world. "Victor, must you always rush?" Eleanor's voice was soft, almost a sigh, as she lingered by the hearth, warming her delicate hands. Langford snorted. "Time is money, my dear. You do well to remember it." Next to arrive was Mr. Harold Baxter, Langford's business partner, a lanky figure whose stooped posture belied his 45 years. His wire-rimmed spectacles perched precariously on a hawkish nose, and his thinning hair was combed meticulously to mask a receding crown. Clad in a somber gray suit that hung loosely on his frame, Baxter exuded the air of a clerk thrust into prominence, his every gesture tinged with deference to Langford. Yet his eyes, a watery blue, betrayed a simmering resentment, as though he chafed under his partner's dominance. Psychologically, Baxter was a man of calculation, his envy of Langford's success a slow poison that eroded his civility. He carried a leather satchel, clutching it as though it contained his very soul, and murmured a greeting to Grady that was barely audible over the storm. "Evening, Grady," Baxter said, his voice thin. "I trust the books are in order." The question seemed innocuous. Creativity, a double-edged sword that could inspire or destroy. She tossed her sodden coat to Grady with a laugh. "This place is positively Gothic, Uncle Victor. Do you mean to trap us all in a novel?" Langford's chuckle was dismissive. "Your fancies, Clara, will bankrupt you yet." The maid, Miss Sophie Turner, hovered at the edges, a mousy figure of 22 whose plain muslin dress and downcast hazel eyes rendered her nearly invisible. Her hands, small and nimble, trembled as she gathered coats, and her demeanor suggested a soul burdened by unspoken shame. Psychologically, she was a cipher, her timidity masking a resilience forged in adversity, perhaps a secret tied to her lowly station. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, sensing depths unplumbed. Finally, Dr. Elias Morton, a guest already ensconced, descended the stairs with the measured tread of a scholar. At 60, his mane of silver hair and glinting monocle lent him an air of academic gravitas, his tweed jacket redolent of pipe smoke and old books. His gray eyes, sharp and probing, surveyed the newcomers with detached curiosity. Psychologically, Morton was a man of intellect and restraint, yet Poirot detected a shadow of bitterness, as though some ancient slight had left its mark. "A lively gathering," Morton remarked, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "The storm brings us together, it seems." As the guests assembled in the oak-paneled dining room, the storm outside reached a crescendo, its howls weaving a tapestry of unease. The long table was set with crystal decanters and silver candelabra, their flames casting flickering shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets. The aroma of roast pheasant wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the tang of pipe smoke and the faint sweetness of Eleanor's jasmine. Poirot, seated at the far end, observed the interplay. Langford's bombast, Eleanor's detachment, Baxter's deference, Clara's defiance, Grady's tension, Sophie's reticence, Morton's composure. Each was a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. "Messieurs, mesdames," Poirot murmured to him, rain lashing the mullioned windows as though seeking entry, while the weather vane atop the inn spun wildly, its metallic creak a counterpoint to the crackling hearth. The air was thick with the scent of roast pheasant, laced with the acrid tang of pipe smoke and the faint sweetness of jasmine. A perfume that clung to Eleanor Langford like a whispered secret. It was a night poised on the edge of civility, where the veneer of decorum trembled under the weight of unspoken tensions. Hercule Poirot, seated at the far end of the long table, sipped his claret with the precision of a man who savored order above all else. His green eyes, sharp as a falcon's, darted from one guest to another, cataloging every gesture, every inflection, as though each were a clue in a puzzle yet to be revealed. His waxed mustache twitched slightly, a silent testament to the workings of his little gray cells. The Belgian detective, ostensibly here for repose, found his senses attuned to the undercurrents that swirled beneath the surface of this disparate gathering. "Mon Dieu," he murmured to himself. "The human heart. It is a labyrinth, and tonight it is most labyrinthine." At the head of the table, Victor Langford held court with the imperious air of a monarch, his broad shoulders dominating the space as he carved the pheasant with a flourish. His ruddy face, framed by a neatly trimmed beard, glowed with the confidence of a man who had conquered markets and men alike. His voice, a resonant baritone, filled the room as he regaled the company with tales of his spice empire. "The trade, my friends, is no place for the timid," he boomed, his dark eyes glinting with predatory zeal. "In Bombay, I outwitted a merchant who thought to swindle me with saffron cut with marigold. Crushed him like a cardamom pod underfoot." His laugh was a thunderclap, echoing the storm outside, but it carried a note of cruelty that set Poirot's mind to work. Langford's psyche, he noted, was a fortress of ambition, its walls impervious to empathy, its foundations built on the subjugation of others. Eleanor Langford, seated to his right, offered a faint smile, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the light as he adjusted them nervously. His lanky frame seemed to shrink under the weight of his gray suit, its drabness a stark contrast to Langford's vibrant tweed. Baxter's thinning hair, combed meticulously across his scalp, did little to mask his insecurities, and his watery blue eyes flickered with a resentment he dared not voice. As Langford's business partner, he was a man elevated beyond his natural station. Yet his psyche was a cauldron of envy, simmering with the knowledge that Langford reaped the lion's share of their profits. "Indeed, Victor," Baxter said, his voice thin as a reed. "But partnerships thrive on equity, do they not? A fair division strengthens the enterprise." The words were polite, but Poirot noted the tightening of Baxter's lips, the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped his fork. A man on the edge of rebellion. Clara Langford, Victor's niece, interjected with a sharp laugh that cut through the room like a blade. Her auburn curls, barely contained by her cloche hat, tossed defiantly as she leaned forward, her emerald dress catching the candlelight. At 25, she was a blaze of youthful indignation, her green eyes sparkling with a defiance that bordered on recklessness. "Uncle, your equity seems reserved for those who grovel," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "What a family! Or does your empire leave no room for those who dare to dream?" Her psychology was one of thwarted ambition, her aspirations as an artist stifled by Langford's parsimony and his recent decision to strike her from his will. Poirot noted the sketchbook she clutched, its edges worn from constant use, and wondered what vengeful strokes her pencil might have traced. Thomas Grady, the innkeeper, moved silently around the table, pouring port with a practiced hand. His burly frame, clad in a stained apron, seemed out of place among the polished guests. Yet his stormy gray eyes missed nothing. His weathered face, lined with the scars of a hard life, betrayed a grudge that simmered beneath his forced joviality. Psychologically, he was a man of resilience, lowly station. That gnawed at her silence. A locket at her throat glinted briefly, and Poirot's curiosity stirred. What face might it hold? Dr. Elias Morton, the scholarly guest, sipped his brandy with the air of a man accustomed to observing rather than participating. His silver hair and glinting monocle lent him an air of gravitas, his tweed jacket redolent of pipe smoke and old books. At 60, his gray eyes were sharp and probing, yet they carried a shadow of bitterness, as though some ancient slight had left its mark. "Human ambition, Mr. Langford, is a double-edged blade," he remarked, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "It cuts both ways, does it not?" His psychology was one of calculated restraint, but Poirot sensed a vendetta, perhaps rooted in a forgotten betrayal by Langford in their youth. As the meal progressed, the conversation grew strained, punctuated by the clink of silverware and the occasional rumble of thunder. Langford continued his tales, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him. "In Cairo," he boasted, "I secured a shipment of cumin that turned a rival's fortune to dust. Strategy, my friends, is everything." Eleanor's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass. Baxter's nod was mechanical, his eyes darting to the decanter. Clara rolled her eyes, sketching idly on a napkin. Grady's jaw clenched as he cleared plates, and Sophie dropped a spoon, her gasp barely audible. Morton's monocle glinted as he leaned back, his expression unreadable. Poirot, ever the observer, catalogued each nuance. Eleanor's distraction, perhaps a lover's memory. Baxter's envy, a motive for sabotage. Clara's bitterness, ripe for rash action. Grady's grudge, simmering like stew. Sophie's fear, a secret clawing to escape. Morton's calm, too composed for innocence. The air, he thought, it is thick with the perfume of deceit. Decanters gleamed on a mahogany sideboard, their amber contents reflecting the flickering flames, while the air carried the mingled scents of brandy, pipe smoke, and the faint jasmine that clung to Eleanor Langford. The storm outside howled with a ferocity that seemed to mirror the tensions within, as though nature itself sensed the impending calamity. Hercule Poirot, ensconced in a high-backed armchair near the hearth, held a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare, though his green eyes strayed often from the page. His waxed mustache, a paragon of symmetry, twitched as he observed the assembled company, his little gray cells attuned to the subtlest shifts in demeanor. The Belgian detective, ostensibly here for repose, found himself instead in a theater of human passions, where every glance and gesture hinted at secrets yet to be unveiled. Mon Dieu, he murmured, closing the book with a soft thud. The stage is set, and the actors, they play their parts with such conviction. But what lies beneath? Victor Langford, the spice magnate, stood by the sideboard, his robust frame dominating the room as he poured himself a generous measure of brandy. His tweed suit, its earthy tones clashing with his emerald tie, strained against his broad shoulders, and his ruddy face glowed with the flush of wine and arrogance. His dark eyes, predatory and unyielding, surveyed the room as though it were a boardroom ripe for conquest. Psychologically, he was a tyrant of ambition, blind to the resentments his dominance provoked. A fine vintage, this, he boomed, swirling the amber liquid. Nothing like a good brandy to ward off the chill of these cursed moors. His voice carried a note of triumph, as though even the storm were a foe he could subdue. Eleanor Langford, seated on a velvet settee, gazed into the fire, her porcelain hands folded delicately in her lap. Her midnight silk gown shimmered faintly, and her raven hair, pinned in an elegant chignon, caught the firelight like polished obsidian. Her blue eyes, deep and melancholic, the tray thin and strained. Though I dare say moderation serves us better in such uncertain times. The words were polite, but Poirot detected a barb, a hint of defiance in the tightening of Baxter's jaw. Clara Langford, Victor's niece, perched on the arm of a chair, her auburn curls tumbling defiantly from beneath her cloche hat. Her emerald dress clung to her lithe figure, and her green eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and indignation. At 25, she was a tempest of youthful ambition, her dreams of artistry thwarted by her uncle's parsimony and recent disinheritance. Her psychology was volatile, a blend of passion and resentment that could ignite at the slightest provocation. "Moderation, Mr. Baxter," she scoffed, tossing her head. "Uncle Victor knows only excess, whether in brandy or in crushing others' hopes." Her sketchbook lay open on her lap, a pencil sketch of a stormy moor half-finished, its lines sharp with suppressed anger. Thomas Grady, the innkeeper, stood by the door, his burly frame tense as he surveyed the room. His weathered face, lined with the scars of a hard life, was set in a mask of forced civility, but his stormy gray eyes betrayed a simmering grudge. Psychologically, he was a man of resilience, yet haunted by a past injustice. Rumors of a swindled investment at Langford's hands lingered like a shadow. He busied himself with clearing empty glasses, his movements brusque. "More brandy, sir?" he asked Langford, his tone clipped. Poirot noted the way Grady's hand lingered near the decanter, as though tempted to act on some buried impulse. Sophie Turner, the maid, moved silently, refilling a water jug with trembling hands. Her plain muslin dress rendered her nearly invisible, and her hazel eyes remained downcast, avoiding all contact. At 22, her psychology was one of hidden strength beneath a veneer of timidity, as though she carried a secret too heavy to bear. A locket at her throat caught the firelight, and Poirot wondered what it concealed, a lover perhaps, or a deeper tie to this drama. Her silence was point true, and may we all find prosperity within its walls. The guests echoed the toast, their voices a discordant chorus, but Poirot noted the reluctance in their gestures. Eleanor's glass barely touched her lips. Baxter's hand shook slightly. Clara's toast was accompanied by a sardonic smirk, Grady's eyes narrowed, Sophie flinched, and Morton's smile tightened. Langford quaffed his brandy deeply, savoring its burn. But within moments his face contorted in agony. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the rug as he clutched his throat, gasping, "Poison! The burn!" His robust frame convulsed, froth flecking his lips, his dark eyes wide with terror. He staggered, then collapsed with a sickening thud, his body sprawled across the Persian rug like a fallen titan. The room erupted in chaos. Eleanor screamed, her porcelain facade shattering as she rose, her shawl falling to the floor. "Victor! No!" Her voice was a wail, but Poirot noted a flicker of relief in her eyes, swiftly masked. Baxter leaped back, his spectacles askew, his face pale. "Good God, what's happened?" His voice trembled, but his hands were steady, as though accustomed to crisis. Clara froze, her sketchbook slipping to the floor, her green eyes wide with horror. "Uncle," she whispered, her defiance replaced by shock. Grady rushed in from the doorway, bellowing, "Someone fetch a doctor!" His burly frame loomed over the scene, his eyes darting accusingly. Sophie dropped a tray of glasses, the shards scattering like scattered clues, her gasp swallowed by the storm. She backed against the wall, her locket clutched tightly. Morton knelt beside Langford, his monocle glinting as he felt for a pulse. His scholarly calm remained intact, but his voice was grave. Cyanide by the symptoms, swift and merciless. He's gone. Poirot sprang to his feet with surprising agility, his book forgotten. His green eyes blazed with purpose as he stepped forward, his small stature commanding the room. "Messieurs, mesdames, touch nothing," he declared, his Belgian accent sharp and authoritative. Moments bore the shrouded form of his body under a white sheet, a silent sentinel of death. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of spilled liquor, the faint jasmine of Eleanor Langford's perfume, and the lingering musk of fear. Outside, the gale howled with unrelenting fury, sealing the guests within as though fate itself had locked the doors. The weather vane atop the inn spun wildly, its metallic screech a counterpoint to the murmurs of suspicion that filled the room. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of this maelstrom, his diminutive figure commanding despite the chaos. His patent leather shoes gleamed under the firelight. His waxed mustache twitched with purpose, and his green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, swept the room with a precision that missed nothing. The Belgian detective, thrust from his intended respite into the heart of a murder, was in his element, his little gray cells whirring like a finely tuned mechanism. "Messieurs, mesdames," he declared, his voice crisp with authority. "The local constable is delayed by this tempest most formidable. Until his arrival, Hercule Poirot assumes command. We are in the presence of a crime most heinous. Poison, administered with intent. But fear not, for the truth it cannot hide from me." The guests, scattered like chess pieces on a board, stared at the shrouded corpse, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and guarded calculation. Poirot's mind catalogued each expression, each gesture, as he began his meticulous examination of the scene. The brandy decanter, its crystal facets catching the firelight, stood on the mahogany sideboard, its contents now a vessel of death. A scrap of azure silk clung to its base, its hue matching the scarf Eleanor Langford had worn at dinner. Poirot's gloved hand lifted it delicately, his eyes narrowing. "Curieux," he murmured. A clue, perhaps, or a distraction. Nearby, the spilled brandy on the rug revealed faint footprints, their tread matching the brogue's velvet settee, her porcelain hands clasped tightly. Her midnight silk gown shimmered faintly, but her blue eyes, deep as a winter lake, betrayed a flicker of unease. "Madame Langford," Poirot said, his tone gentle yet probing. "Your husband, he was a man with enemies, n'est-ce pas?" Eleanor's lips parted, then closed, as though weighing her words. "Many, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice a soft sigh. "The spice trade is a battlefield, and Victor relished the fight." Her gaze darted to the shrouded corpse, then away, and Poirot noted the gesture. A widow's grief, or a mask for relief? Her psychology suggested a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, her melancholy hinting at a secret passion, perhaps an affair that Langford's death might free. Next, Poirot approached Harold Baxter, who stood by the sideboard, his lanky frame hunched as though shielding himself from scrutiny. His wire-rimmed spectacles glinted nervously, and his watery blue eyes avoided Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Baxter," Poirot said, "you and Monsieur Langford were partners, oui. Yet partnerships, they are not always harmonious." Baxter's hands twitched, clutching his leather satchel. "We had our disagreements," he admitted, his voice thin. "Over shares, profits. But murder? Preposterous." His denial was vehement, but Poirot noted the sweat beading on his brow, the tick in his jaw. A man whose envy might have curdled into action. Clara Langford, Victor's niece, stood by the window, her auburn curls disheveled as she stared into the storm. Her emerald dress clung to her lithe figure, and her green eyes, usually sparkling with defiance, were clouded with shock. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot said, his tone softening. "Your uncle, he altered his will recently, did he not? A decision most provocative." Clara's head snapped up, her lips curling in a bitter smile. "He cut me out last week, called my art frivolous." Muslin dress rendering her nearly invisible. Her hazel eyes remained downcast, her hands trembling as she gathered shards of a broken glass. "Mademoiselle Sophie," Poirot said gently, "you were near the sideboard earlier, were you not? Did you see anything unusual?" Sophie's head jerked up, her locket glinting as she clutched it. "I saw nothing, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was in the kitchen, fetching water." Her timidity was a shield, but Poirot noted the fear in her eyes, the way her fingers tightened around the locket. A secret, perhaps, that bound her to this tragedy. Finally, Poirot turned to Dr. Elias Morton, who stood by the mantel, his silver hair and monocle lending him an air of detached calm. His gray eyes met Poirot's with a faint smile, as though amused by the proceedings. "Dr. Morton," Poirot said, "you identified the poison as cyanide, a diagnosis most precise. Your knowledge, it is extensive, oui?" Morton's smile widened, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "A scholarly dispute with Langford long ago, Monsieur Poirot. Water under the bridge. As for cyanide, any physician would recognize its symptoms." His composure was impeccable, but Poirot sensed a calculation beneath, a bitterness that lingered like a scar. As the interrogations concluded, Poirot stepped back, his mind a whirl of clues and contradictions. The azure silk suggested Eleanor, but its placement seemed too convenient. The footprints implicated Baxter, yet their clarity hinted at fabrication. The timeline pointed to a narrow window, yet alibis clashed. Sophie's claim of being in the kitchen contradicted Grady's account of seeing her near the decanter at 9:30. Red herrings abounded, motives intertwined like vines. Eleanor's secret passion, Baxter's envy, Clara's rage, Grady's grudge, Sophie's fear, Morton's vendetta. Each was a thread in a tapestry Poirot would unravel. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, stroking his mustache. "The puzzle, it is complex." Chapter 5. Echoes from the Past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak table where she sat, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. The village of St. Mary Mead buzzed with a restless energy, the air thick with whispers about Mrs. Harrington's untimely death and the missing emerald necklace. Yet, for Miss Marple, the puzzle lay not in the gossip, but in the quiet details, a peculiar red-tinged mud stain that refused to fade from her thoughts. It was a clue that tugged at her like an errant thread in her knitting, demanding to be unraveled. Determined to trace its origins, Miss Marple donned her sturdy walking shoes and a tweed shawl. Her destination, the Harrington estate's attic, where old secrets often lay buried beneath dust and time. The manor loomed at the edge of the village, its ivy-clad walls hiding stories as old as the oaks that lined its drive. The housekeeper, Mrs. Baines, greeted her with a wary nod, her hands twisting a dishcloth as she led the way upstairs. "Mind the creaky steps, Miss Marple," Mrs. Baines said, her voice low, as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. "Mrs. Harrington kept all sorts up here. Letters, diaries, things from before my time." The attic smelled of aged paper and forgotten summers, its air heavy with the weight of memory. Trunks lined the walls, their brass clasps tarnished but sturdy. Miss Marple knelt beside one, her nimble fingers prying it open to reveal a trove of letters tied with faded ribbon. As she sifted through them, a faint smudge of red-tinged mud caught her eye on an envelope, its postmark dated 20 years prior. Her pulse quickened. This was no ordinary dirt, but the same clay she'd seen on the vicar's cassock and the greenhouse glove. "Mrs. Baines," Miss Marple called softly, holding up the envelope. "Do you know where this red mud might come from? It's not from the village paths." The housekeeper frowned, peering at the stain. "That's quarry clay, I reckon. There's an old quarry. Prospects of my own." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she spotted a crumpled telegram receipt peeking from his pocket, its edge smudged with the same red clay. She made a mental note, her needles never pausing. Lionel's alibi was as fragile as a cracked teacup, and she intended to test it. As the inn emptied, Miss Marple approached the postmistress, Miss Clara, who was wiping down the counter. "Clara, dear, might you recall when Lionel sent a telegram last week? He seems awfully proud of his London trip." Miss Clara's eyes twinkled with the thrill of gossip. "Oh, he sent one all right, but it wasn't from London. He was here in the post office, the very day Mrs. Harrington died. I remember because he was in such a rush, mud all over his boots." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind weaving connections. The mud on Lionel's boots, the telegram, the quarry clay. It was a pattern, subtle but undeniable. She needed more, something to tie the threads together. That afternoon she visited the vicarage where Mrs. Langley, the vicar's wife, was tending her roses. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she snipped a wilted bloom, and Miss Marple sensed a confession brewing. "Mrs. Langley," she began gently, "you seem troubled. If there's something weighing on you, I'm all ears." The words tumbled out like spilled tea. "Oh, Miss Marple, I've been dreadful. I wasn't at the Women's Institute meeting the night Mrs. Harrington died. I was meeting someone in secret by the old oak near the river. I didn't want the vicar to know." Miss Marple nodded, her expression soft but probing. "And did you notice anything unusual? Perhaps a path with red clay?" Mrs. Langley's eyes widened. "Yes, the path by the river. It's near the quarry trail. I saw footprints, fresh ones, leading toward it that night." The revelation was a spark in Miss Marple's mind. The quarry was emerging as the heart of the mystery, a place where secrets converged. But before she could pursue it, a commotion erupted at the village green. Lionel and Mr. Thorne, the gardener, stood nose to nose. With a deft touch, Miss Marple shifted the conversation, revealing a minor indiscretion. Lionel had indeed been in the village, but only to cover a small gambling debt, not to commit murder. The crowd murmured, satisfied, as the tension dissolved. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the quarry, its red clay a silent witness to darker deeds. That evening, a village meeting was called at the town hall, the air thick with accusations and half-truths. Inspector Craddock stood at the front, his notebook filled with conflicting alibis. Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting a steady rhythm as she observed. When a villager suggested the letters in the attic might hold a clue, all eyes turned to her. Rising, she spoke with measured calm. "The letters are indeed revealing, but not of murder. They speak of an old quarrel, a wartime disagreement between Mrs. Harrington and the vicar over a charity fund. Someone tried to forge a letter to implicate him, but the ink was too fresh, the handwriting too clumsy." The room gasped, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "This forgery is a distraction. The real clue lies elsewhere, in the mud that stains our story." As the meeting dispersed, harmony restored for the moment. Miss Marple returned to her cottage. By the fireside, she spread the attic letters before her, their red-tinged smudges glowing in the lamplight. The quarry was no mere backdrop. It was a stage where the killer had tread, leaving traces of their guilt. She recalled a village scandal from her youth, a theft solved by a single footprint in clay, and smiled. The past was echoing, guiding her toward the truth. Tomorrow, she would visit the quarry with Inspector Craddock, to walk the path where the mud was born. For now, she set her knitting aside, the fire crackling as her thoughts wove a tapestry of suspicion. The vicar's cassock, Lionel's telegram, Mrs. Langley's secret, all were threads, but the red clay was the needle. Room, his patent leather shoes gleaming faintly in the dim glow of a gas lamp. His waxed mustache, a paragon of symmetry, twitched as his green eyes, sharp as a hawk's, surveyed the silent inn. The Belgian detective, far from the repose he had sought, was now a hunter of truth, his little gray cells weaving the disparate threads of evidence into a tapestry of motive and opportunity. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his voice a soft cadence in the stillness. "The night has revealed much, but the dawn, it brings clarity. Hercule Poirot shall follow where the threads lead. The morning light, feeble though it was, illuminated fresh clues that had eluded the chaos of the previous evening. Poirot's explorations had taken him beyond the guests' rooms, and now, as he ventured outside, the sodden ground of the inn's courtyard yielded a discovery. A footprint, distinct despite the rain, pressed into the mud beneath Langford's window. Its size and tread matched Dr. Elias Morton's polished brogues, a curious find given his claim of a constitutional walk during the storm. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied the mark. Most peculiar, he mused. The rain, it should have erased such a print, yet here it stands, as if placed with intent. The footprint suggested a presence outside at the critical hour of 9:40, contradicting Morton's alibi and hinting at a more active role in the night's events. Returning indoors, Poirot's attention turned to the hearth in the drawing room, where the fire had dwindled to embers. Among the ashes he found a scrap of fabric, singed but identifiable as a fragment of Clara Langford's emerald dress, its vibrant hue unmistakable. The discovery was troubling. Had Clara, in her rage, ventured too close to the crime? Or was this another thread woven to mislead? Poirot's fingers brushed the fabric, his mind cataloging its implications. Mademoiselle Clara, he thought, your passion, it burns bright. But is it the fire of guilt? Psychological clues mounted as Poirot reflected on the suspect's behaviors. Harold Baxter's nervous tick, a rapid blink behind Clara, whose auburn curls framed a face pale with exhaustion. Mademoiselle Clara, he said, his tone gentle yet incisive. Your sketchbook, it reveals a heart most aggrieved. Did your anger lead you to action beyond the page? Clara's green eyes flashed, her voice sharp. I wished him ill, Monsieur Poirot, but murder? I'd rather paint his ruin than poison his glass. Her defiance was fierce, but Poirot noted the tremor in her hands as she clutched her sketchbook, the singed fabric a silent accusation in his mind. Turning to Thomas Grady, who stood by the door, his burly frame rigid, Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur Grady, the cyanide in your cellar, it is for vermin, you say. Yet your history with Monsieur Langford, it speaks of a vermin more personal, n'est-ce pas? Grady's stormy gray eyes darkened, his calloused hands clenching. He ruined my family, aye. Took our farm for his cursed spices. But I'm no sneak with poison, I'd face him square. His voice was a growl, but Poirot noted the flicker of fear in his gaze, as though the truth teetered on the edge of revelation. Sophie Turner, summoned next, stood trembling, her muslin dress a stark contrast to the opulence of the room. Her hazel eyes avoided Poirot's, her locket clutched tightly. Mademoiselle Sophie, Poirot said softly, your locket, it holds Monsieur Langford's image. Your father, perhaps, a secret that drove you to despair? Sophie's breath caught, her voice breaking. He was my father, sir, but he denied me, called me a shame. I hated him, but I didn't. I couldn't. Tears welled and she fled, her footsteps echoing like a confession. Poirot's heart stirred with pity, but his mind remained relentless. Her alibi, contradicted by Grady, placed her near the decanter at 9:30, a thread that refused to align. Dr. Morton, seated with his monocle glinting, met Poirot's gaze with a faint smile. Doctor, Poirot said, your expertise with cyanide. Madame, Poirot said, the letter in your room, it speaks of freedom. Did you seek it through your husband's death? Eleanor's lips parted, then closed. My heart sought escape, Monsieur Poirot, but not through murder. I loved another, yes. But Victor's death, it was not my doing. Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the flicker of relief in her gaze, a clue to her true feelings. As the interrogations concluded, Poirot retreated to the corridor, his mind a whirl of threads. The footprint suggested Morton's presence, but its clarity hinted at fabrication. The singed fabric implicated Clara, yet its placement seemed too convenient. Sophie's paternity was a motive, but her fear suggested innocence. Baxter's embezzlement was damning, yet his cowardice clashed with the crime's boldness. Grady's cyanide was a weapon at hand, but his bluntness argued against subtlety. Eleanor's letter pointed to a lover, but her grief, however feigned, lacked the fire of a killer. Morton's vendetta, tied to a stolen thesis, was the most compelling, yet his alibi, though shaky, held. A new clue emerged as Poirot re-examined the drawing room. A faint scratch on the sideboard, overlooked in the chaos, suggested a struggle. A glass knocked aside, perhaps, or a decanter tampered with. The timeline tightened. Langford poured at 9:45, the poison acting instantly, suggesting administration at 9:40. Morton's absence at that hour, coupled with the footprint, was a thread Poirot could not ignore. The tapestry. It begins to take shape, Poirot murmured, stroking his mustache. But the threads, they are tangled with misdirection. The killer, he is clever, but Hercule Poirot is more so. The dawn light grew stronger, casting long shadows that seemed to point accusingly at the guilty. The weather vane groaned, its arrow steady now, as though urging Poirot onward. The truth, he thought, it lies in the unraveling of these threads. And I shall find a room, where the long table, stripped of its damask cloth, now served as a battleground for truth. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the pale light filtering through the windows. His waxed mustache twitched with purpose, and his green eyes, sharp as a falcon's, surveyed the assembled suspects with unrelenting scrutiny. The Belgian detective, drawn inexorably into the heart of this enigma, was a beacon of order in the chaos, his little gray cells weaving a tapestry from the tangled threads of motive and opportunity. Mon Dieu, he murmured, his voice a soft cadence in the tense silence. The labyrinth of lies. It is intricate, but Hercule Poirot navigates with precision. The truth, it cannot hide forever. The morning had brought a fever pitch of suspicion, as the guests, sleepless and frayed, began to point fingers. The dining room, its candelabra unlit and its air heavy with unspoken accusations, was a crucible of human frailty. Harold Baxter, his lanky frame hunched, was the first to break the silence, his wire-rimmed spectacles glinting as he gestured toward Thomas Grady. "That's cyanide in your cellar, Grady," he said, his voice thin but sharp. "It's no coincidence. You've hated Langford for years. Admit it." His watery blue eyes flickered with desperation, as though deflecting blame might shield his own secrets. Psychologically, Baxter was a man teetering on the edge, his embezzlement a noose tightening around his neck. Grady's burly frame stiffened, his weathered face flushing with anger. His stormy gray eyes locked onto Baxter, and his calloused hands clenched into fists. "You dare, Baxter?" he growled, his West Country burr thick with indignation. "You, who've been pilfering from Langford's coffers? I'd wager you slipped the poison to save your own skin." His grudge against Langford, rooted in a swindled farm, was a wound laid bare, but Poirot noted the bluntness of his accusation. a man more suited to fists than subterfuge. Eleanor Langford, seated with her porcelain hands folded. Hearth. A clue that suggested either guilt or a frame. Sophie Turner, hovering near the door, flinched at the rising voices, her muslin dress rendering her nearly invisible. Her hazel eyes, wide with fear, darted between the accusers, her locket clutched tightly. "I didn't do it," she whispered, unprompted, her voice trembling. "I swear I didn't." Her psychology, marked by the shame of her illegitimacy as Langford's daughter, suggested a motive, but her terror argued innocence. Poirot's gaze lingered, noting her contradicted alibi. She claimed the kitchen at 9:30, yet Grady placed her near the decanter. Dr. Elias Morton, leaning against the wall with his monocle glinting, offered a wry smile. "Perhaps, my friends, we consider the unthinkable. Suicide?" Langford was a man under pressure, was he not? His voice, smooth as aged whiskey, carried a scholar's detachment, but Poirot's eyes narrowed. Morton's psychology, rooted in a long-ago betrayal over a stolen thesis, was too composed. His suggestion of suicide absurd given Langford's bombast. The footprint beneath the window, matching Morton's brogues, was a thread that refused to unravel. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the cacophony. "Enough, mes amis," he said, his Belgian accent crisp. "Accusations, they are like the wind, loud but directionless. Let us examine the facts." He produced a small notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes. The poison, it was cyanide, administered in the brandy at 9:40, as the symptoms were instantaneous. The decanter, it was unattended from 9:30 to 9:40, a window most critical. Yet each of you claims innocence, and the clues, they weave a labyrinth of lies. He turned to Baxter, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur Baxter, your ledger reveals theft, a motive most grave. Yet your fear, it suggests cowardice, not cunning." Baxter's tic intensified, his face paling. To Grady, Poirot, perhaps. The timeline tightened. Langford drank at 9:45, but the poison was added at 9:40, when Morton was absent and Sophie's alibi faltered. Yet the scratch hinted at a third hand, a subtle act of misdirection. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the fragments. A hidden will alteration, discovered in Langford's valise, named Sophie as a beneficiary, but its ink was fresh, a forgery by Baxter perhaps to deflect suspicion. The azure silk scrap, the pristine footprints, the singed fabric, all were red herrings woven to mislead. Morton's vendetta, tied to a stolen thesis, remained the strongest thread, yet his alibi, though shaky, held. Sophie's contradicted timeline suggested involvement, but her fear argued against it. Eleanor's lover, Baxter's theft, Clara's rage, Grady's grudge, each was a motive, but none aligned perfectly with the crime's precision. "The key," Poirot murmured, stroking his mustache. "It is in the weather vane itself, pointing to the wind of deceit. The killer, he is clever, but he overlooks the details that betray." As the guests dispersed, their accusations echoing in the corridors, Poirot stood alone, his notebook open. The drizzle outside softened, but the tension within grew sharper. The weather vane groaned, its arrow steady now as though urging Poirot toward the truth. "The labyrinth," he thought. "It is deep, but Hercule Poirot shall find the exit. Chapter 8. Gathering the Strands. The weather-vane inn, standing resolute against the desolate moors of Devon, seemed to exhale a sigh of weary resignation as the morning light strengthened, casting a pallid glow through the mullioned windows. The storm that had raged through the night had dwindled to a ghostly mist, cloaking the landscape in a shroud that mirrored the mystery within. The inn's ancient timbers creaked softly, as though whispering secrets to the shadows, while the weather-vane atop the roof, now still, pointed north with a final groan, as if it had settled stillness. The strands, they are many, but Hercule Poirot shall gather them into order. The truth, it is near. The morning had brought a lull in the accusations that had flared like wildfire among the suspects. But Poirot's relentless inquiry had uncovered new threads that tightened the web of suspicion. His nocturnal explorations had revealed a letter in Eleanor's room, hinting at a lover's plot, a ledger in Baxter's possession, exposing embezzlement, vengeful sketches in Clara's book, a bottle of cyanide in Grady's cellar, Sophie's locket, revealing her as Langford's unacknowledged daughter, and a phial of cyanide in Morton's medical bag, coupled with the letter about a stolen thesis. Each clue was a strand, but some were woven to mislead, and Poirot's task was to discern the true from the false. He began by revisiting the physical evidence. The azure silk scrap, matching Eleanor's scarf, was too conveniently placed by the decanter, suggesting a deliberate attempt to implicate her. The footprints in the spilled brandy, matching Baxter's brogues, were too pristine for the chaos of the moment, hinting at fabrication. The singed fabric from Clara's dress in the hearth was damning, yet its placement seemed orchestrated, as though someone sought to cast suspicion on her fiery temperament. The scratch on the sideboard, discovered in the drawing room, suggested a glass had been swapped, a subtle act of misdirection that pointed to a careful hand. Poirot's magnifying glass traced the mark, his mind calculating. A hand most cunning, he thought, but not cunning enough to escape Hercule Poirot. Psychological clues, too, were mounting. Eleanor's feigned grief, marked by fleeting glances of relief, suggested a woman liberated by her husband's death, perhaps tied to the mysterious lover in her letter. Baxter's nervous tick and sweaty brow betrayed a man haunted by his theft, his embezzlement a motive that could have driven him to murder. Clara's rage, evident in her venomous sketches, was a fire that could have sparked action. The kitchen was contradicted by Grady's claim of seeing her near the decanter at 9:30. The footprint beneath Langford's window, matching Morton's brogues, was a damning clue, though its clarity in the rain suggested tampering. The forged will, naming Sophie as a beneficiary, pointed to Baxter's desperation, but its fresh ink suggested a post-murder ploy to deflect suspicion. Poirot paced the room, his fingers stroking his mustache as he assembled the strands. The silk, it is a red herring, placed to implicate Madame Eleanor, he mused. The footprints, they are fabricated, perhaps by the same hand that scratched the sideboard. The timeline, it points to Morton, absent at the critical moment, and his expertise with cyanide. It is no coincidence. Yet, Sophie's contradicted alibi gnawed at him. Her fear suggested innocence, but her presence near the decanter could not be dismissed. Baxter's forgery was a desperate act, but his cowardice argued against the boldness of poison. Clara's rage, Grady's grudge, Eleanor's lover. Each was a motive, but none aligned perfectly with the crime's precision. A new discovery sharpened Poirot's focus. In the corridor outside Morton's room, he found a faint smudge of mud, barely visible, leading to a back staircase that descended to the courtyard. The mud matched the soil beneath Langford's window, suggesting Morton had indeed ventured outside, despite his claim of a mere walk. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The footprint. It is his. But the mud. It confirms his presence. The weather vane. It saw him, pointing north at 9:40, when he claimed to be elsewhere. To test his theory, Poirot summoned Morton to the dining room for a private interview. The scholar entered with his usual composure, his silver hair and monocle lending him an air of gravitas. "Dr. Morton," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "Your walk at 9:40, it was to study the weather vane, you say. Yet the mud on your shoes, it tells a different tale. One of a journey to the courtyard, beneath Monsieur Langford's window, and the footprint tied him to the crime." But Poirot sensed a deeper layer. Was Sophie an unwitting accomplice, her presence near the decanter a distraction orchestrated by the true killer? Or was Baxter's forgery a sign of deeper involvement? Poirot closed his notebook, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The killer, he is clever, weaving a web of lies, he thought. But Hercule Poirot sees the pattern, and the strands. They are coming together. The mist outside thickened, cloaking the moors in secrecy. But within the inn, the truth was emerging. The weather vane, now silent, stood as a sentinel, its arrow pointing to the guilty. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. The weather vane inn, standing resolute against the desolate moors of Devon, seemed to hold its breath as the morning mist thickened, cloaking the landscape in a veil of secrecy. The storm that had battered the inn through the night had subsided, leaving only a ghostly drizzle that clung to the mullioned windows like tears. The ancient timbers of the inn creaked softly, as though weary of the secrets they harbored, while the weather vane atop the roof, now still, pointed north with a final groan, as if it had settled on its judgment. The air within was heavy with the lingering scents of spilled brandy, extinguished candles, and the faint jasmine that trailed Eleanor Langford. Victor Langford's shrouded corpse, still lying in the drawing room under its white sheet, was a silent accusation, fueling the mounting tension among the guests. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective, stood at the center of the dining room, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the pale light filtering through the mist. His waxed mustache, a marvel of symmetry, twitched with purpose, and his green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, surveyed the assembled suspects with a piercing intensity. The long table, stripped of its damask cloth, was a stage for the reckoning, its unlit candelabra casting stark shadows that seemed to point accusingly at the guilty. Poirot's little gray cells, humming with relentless precision, had woven the disparate threads, his burly frame tense, his stormy gray eyes narrowed with suspicion. Sophie Turner, the maid, hovered near the hearth, her muslin dress rendering her nearly invisible, her hazel eyes wide with fear as she clutched her locket. Dr. Elias Morton, his silver hair and monocle lending him an air of scholarly detachment, leaned against the mantel, his gray eyes meeting Poirot's with a faint, enigmatic smile. The air crackled with accusations, each suspect eager to deflect suspicion. Clara was the first to speak, her voice sharp as she pointed at Baxter. "You stole from him, Harold. That ledger proves it. You'd do anything to keep your secrets buried." Her rage, fueled by her disinheritance, was a fire that burned brightly. But Poirot noted the tremor in her hands, the singed fabric of her dress still a troubling clue. Baxter's watery blue eyes widened, his tic intensifying. Me? What about Grady's cyanide? He's the one with a grudge older than these Moors. His voice was thin but desperate, his psychology one of a man cornered by his own deceit, his embezzlement a motive that loomed large. Grady's weathered face flushed, his calloused hands clenching. Watch your tongue, Baxter. You're no saint, pilfering Langford's profits. I'd wager you slipped the poison to save your thieving hide. His West Country burr was thick with anger, his grudge against Langford a raw wound that refused to heal. Eleanor's soft voice cut through the fray, her gaze fixed on Clara. And you, Clara, with your venomous sketches and that torn dress in the hearth. Your hatred for Victor was no secret. Her words were measured, but Poirot noted the flicker of calculation in her eyes, as though she sought to shield her own secret. A lover's letter hinting at freedom. Sophie, trembling, whispered unprompted, "I didn't do it, I swear. He was my father, but I couldn't." Her voice broke, her locket gleaming as she clutched it, her illegitimacy a motive that tugged at Poirot's pity but not his suspicion. Morton, his monocle glinting, offered a wry smile. "Perhaps we're all instantaneous." The decanter was unattended from 9:30 to 9:40. A window most critical. Yet each of you weaves a tale of innocence, and the clues, they are a labyrinth of misdirection. He turned to Eleanor, his gaze piercing. "Madame, your letter speaks of a lover, a dream of freedom. Yet your grief, it is too perfect. Perhaps a performance?" Eleanor's lips parted, but she said nothing, her blue eyes dropping. To Baxter he continued, "Monsieur Baxter, your ledger reveals theft, a motive most grave. The forged will, naming Mademoiselle Sophie, it is your handiwork, oui? A desperate act to deflect suspicion." Baxter's face paled, his tic a rapid flutter. To Clara he said, "Mademoiselle, the singed fabric in the hearth, it is yours. Yet its placement is too convenient. A red herring, perhaps." Clara's defiance faltered, her hands trembling. To Grady he noted, "Monsieur Grady, your cyanide. It is damning, but your bluntness, it argues against the subtlety of poison." Grady's scowl deepened, his eyes flickering with fear. To Sophie he softened. "Mademoiselle Sophie, your paternity. It is a wound, but your fear, it speaks of innocence, despite your presence near the decanter." Sophie's tears welled, her locket a silent confession. To Morton he concluded, "Dr. Morton, your footprint, your expertise, your absence at 9:40, they point to you. Yet you're calm. It is a mask most intriguing." Morton's smile tightened, his gray eyes unreadable. A new clue sharpened Poirot's focus. In the drawing room he had noticed a faint residue on the decanter's stopper, a trace of cyanide not fully wiped away, suggesting a gloved hand. The scratch on the sideboard, coupled with the swapped glass, hinted at a careful act of substitution. A poisoned glass meant for Langford alone. The timeline tightened. Morton's absence at 9:40, the mud smudge leading to the courtyard, and the truth was poised to break through. The weather vane stood silent, its arrow unwavering, as the guests awaited Poirot's final revelation. Chapter 10. The Grand Revelation. The Weathervane Inn, perched on the desolate moors of Devon, stood as a silent witness to the drama unfolding within its ancient walls. The morning mist, a ghostly veil that had cloaked the landscape since dawn, clung to the mullioned windows, diffusing the pale light that filtered into the dining room. The storm that had raged through the night was now a distant memory, leaving only a soft drizzle that pattered like a requiem. The inn's oak-paneled walls, polished to a deep sheen, absorbed the tension, their timbers creaking as though straining under the weight of secrets revealed. The weather vane atop the roof, now still, pointed north with unwavering certainty, as if it had finally settled on the truth. The air was heavy with the lingering sense of spilled brandy, extinguished candles, and the faint jasmine that trailed Eleanor Langford. Victor Langford's shrouded corpse, still under its white sheet in the drawing room, was a silent accusation, its presence fueling the anticipation that gripped the assembled guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the long dining table, his diminutive figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the dim light. His waxed mustache twitched with purpose, and his green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, swept over the suspects with unrelenting scrutiny. The table, stripped of its damask cloth, was a stage for the final act, its unlit candelabra casting stark shadows that seemed to point accusingly at the guilty. Poirot's little gray cells, humming with relentless precision, had woven the disparate threads of evidence into a tapestry of truth. "Mes amis," he declared, his Belgian accent crisp and resonant. "The hour of reckoning has arrived. The storm without has passed, but within, the tempest of deceit is at its end. Hercule Poirot shall reveal the murder, if you please." Poirot began, his voice commanding silence. "The murder of Monsieur Langford, poisoned by cyanide in his brandy, was no act of impulse. It was premeditated, a crime of precision, cloaked in a web of misdirection. The clues, they are many, but Hercule Poirot sees through the red herrings to the truth." He paced slowly, his notebook open in his gloved hand. First, the physical evidence, the azure silk scrap, matching Madame Eleanor's scarf, was found by the decanter. Too convenient, no? A deliberate plant to implicate her. The footprints in the spilled brandy, matching Monsieur Baxter's brogues, were too pristine, as if placed after the chaos. The singed fabric from Mademoiselle Clara's dress in the hearth, another distraction, its placement too obvious. The scratch on the sideboard, it suggests a glass was swapped, a subtle act of cunning. And the faint residue of cyanide on the decanter stopper, not fully wiped away, points to a gloved hand. The guests stirred, their murmurs rising. Clara's voice cut through, sharp with indignation. "You're saying someone framed me? Who would do that?" Her green eyes flashed, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Patience, mademoiselle," he said. "Let us consider the timeline. Monsieur Langford poured his brandy at 9:45 as the clock chimed. The cyanide, it acted instantly, meaning it was added at 9:40, when the decanter was unattended from 9:30 to 9:40. Each of you claims an alibi, yet contradictions abound." He turned to Eleanor, his gaze piercing. "Madame Langford, your letter speaks of a lover, a dream of freedom, A motive, oui. But your grief, though feigned, lacks the fire of a killer. Eleanor's lips parted, but she remained silent, her hands trembling slightly. To Baxter, he continued, Monsieur Baxter, your ledger reveals embezzlement, and the forged— Morton's smile tightened, his gray eyes narrowing. A gasp rippled through the room. Baxter stammered, Morton? But the footprints. Anyone could have— Poirot silenced him with a look. Let us unravel the motive, Poirot continued, his voice rising. In 1905, Monsieur Langford stole a chemical thesis from a young scholar, a formula for spice preservation that launched his empire. That scholar, ruined, bided his time, nursing a grudge that festered like a wound. Dr. Morton, it was you. Morton's monocle glinted, his voice steady. Preposterous, Poirot. A youthful dispute long forgotten. But his hand trembled slightly, betraying his composure. Poirot produced a faded paper from his pocket, its edges worn. This, Doctor, is your original thesis, found in your valise with Langford's annotations. You recognized him here at the inn and saw your chance. You procured cyanide from your medical bag, slipped away at 9:40, and added it to the decanter, knowing Langford's habit of a final toast. Morton's face paled, his smile fading. You have no proof, he said, but his voice wavered. Au contraire, Poirot said, his eyes blazing. The weather vane, it is the silent witness. At 9:40 it pointed north, as recorded in the inn's logbook. You claimed an eastward walk, but the mud smudge in the corridor leading to the courtyard and the footprint beneath Langford's window, they betray you. You planted the silk, the footprints, the fabric to scatter suspicion, but you overlooked the weather's truth. A stunned silence fell, broken by Clara's gasp. You monster, she cried, her voice trembling. Sophie sobbed softly, her locket clutched tightly. Morton's composure cracked, his gray eyes blazing. Curse you, Poirot. He stole my life, my work. I waited years for justice. His outburst was a confession, and the room erupted in murmurs. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm.